session. My name is Ejaz Haider, and I will be moderating this session. I have with me Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar, who needs no introduction. She's a former foreign minister of Pakistan. With her is Ms. Leila Hatoum, who's a veteran war correspondent. She's from Beirut as we speak. During the current hostilities, she was traveling back and forth from South Lebanon back to Beirut and then back to South Lebanon and also in the eastern sector. It's great to have her at the festival once again. She was here last year when this genocidal war started, and much water has flown down the Litani River, so to speak, so far. And then finally, but certainly not least, is Dr. Moeed Yusuf. Again, needs no introduction, a former national security advisor and currently the vice chancellor of BNU. Now, I don't want to lock the panelists into my view of Donald Trump. The session obviously is the world according to Trump. But I just want to say a couple of words before we go to the panel. There is, to my mind, because I was doing a lot of research, it's an occupational hazard. To my mind, this idea that Trump is impulsive or that Trump is purely transactional is a misconception. So if anyone goes back and sees what Trump was saying or doing in the last 30 years, there are three strands that come across very clearly. One is, and this is something that he has been expressing off and on, much before he actually ever thought of running for the president of the United States of America. One, America is overstretched. Two, the American allies have taken advantage of America. And three, the global economy doesn't serve America well. And these are the three themes that you come across in the last 30 years. In the 1990 interview, I have a quote from that interview. He was asked, hypothetically, of course, at that point, what would be a President Trump's foreign policy be? And his answer was, he would believe very strongly in extreme military strength. He won't trust anyone. He won't trust the Russians. He won't trust his allies. He would have a huge military arsenal, perfect it, understand it. Part of the problem is that we are defending some of the wealthiest countries in the world for nothing. We are being laughed at around the world defending Japan. So you can clearly see, I mean, if you go back to what he was doing or what he tried to do in the previous term and what he has been saying now, you would realize that what he was saying in 1990 sails very close to what he has been trying to do. Now, it's an important thing to know that beliefs shape the choices, and Trump has certain beliefs. Recently, there's been much, mirth or mockery, if you will, of what he said about Greenland, for instance. The fact of the matter is that Trump is not the first US president to actually talk about Greenland. As far back as 1946, the Americans tried to buy Greenland from Denmark for a price of $100 million. They couldn't get it. That's a separate issue. But they tried to, and if you go back and, there's documents that have been declassified, clearly show that they wanted it for military purposes. Now, you also remember that during Second World War, Denmark was actually occupied by Nazi forces, and the Americans had gone and sat in Greenland. And from that period onwards, They have had a military presence in Greenland, which obviously is a listening post, and it's very important. And previously, you know that they bought Alaska from the Russians back in the late 19th century. So if you look at the map, you have this area, which is Canada and North America, you've got Alaska here, and you've got Greenland here. So from a military purpose, it's an important, sort of acquisition. And then in 2020, for instance, at the World Economic Forum, he told Ursula von der Leyen, by the way, and this is again a quote, NATO is dead and we will leave. We will quit. He does this to put pressure. And this is one of the issues that we are going to talk about in the session. Starts with a bullying way of dealing with something. When he talked about 2% expenditure or more by the European NATO allies, everyone thought he was just bluffing. From that point onwards, now this is part of the conversation, and actually the European defense expenditures have risen, and they're likely to rise. He did the same thing with KORUS, which is the Korea-US trade deal. He said, we'll either quit or we'll negotiate. And he ended up using tariffs as a weapon. He weaponizes tariffs. He renegotiated the deal. He did the same thing with NAFTA. So the point that I'm trying to make is that he is not impulsive. He is not mad, although he uses the madman's theory. And there is a lot of method in his madness. Let's go to our panel now. Not working? Yeah, it's working. So we're going to kind of divide the world and then talk about different geographical areas and the geopolitics of those areas. Starting with the United States itself. So Moeed, if I may begin with you on this. Before we come to the foreign policy, let's start with DOGE, Department of Governmental Efficiency, which is to be headed by two outsiders, Ramaswamy and the famous or infamous, depending on how you look at him, Elon Musk. How do you think he is going to deal with the bureaucracy? And the backdrop to my question is the last time he came to Washington, D.C., he was an outsider. This time he has had 4 years of experience, and he has been, if you go by the Heritage Foundation Agenda 2025, a 1,000-page report, they basically want him to bludgeon the federal bureaucracy. Having worked in the United States for many years, I just want to get your take on how do you think he's going to approach it, and whether he is actually going in to bludgeon them, or is he just trying to intimidate them and get them to toe his line?
Thank you, Ejaz, and thank you to Yaqub and the organizers for having me. So to understand Trump, I think the easiest way I can put it for us is that he has a very private sector Pakistani Seth view of the bureaucracy. No, I'm serious. Which basically says they're all idiots. They don't get it. They get in the way of all efficiency, and thus they need to be cut to size. Number two, they become too big for their boots. They think they can rule the roost. Who's given them this right to do so? And thus I'm going to bring people from the outside who don't necessarily understand DC, but understand that everything is wrong with DC. So he'll come in with a hammer. Everything will be a nail. He doesn't know where this will go. The two people you've mentioned have no clue how to do this. But where I think he has confidence is that his electorate has basically agreed with him that Washington's formula for the US has not worked. And one of the reasons is that Washington is too bloated. So that's really as far as he's gone. How it happens, I think they're going to play it by ear. I don't know if the two gents that you're talking about are going to be seeing this through to the end of his term. You know, who knows how long they stay and how they do this, but he's basically a disruptor. He's come in, he's going to disrupt the bureaucracy. He knows how to break things. Making it is another story. So we'll see where we end up.
So a quick follow-up on this before we move on to other areas, and then circle back to his foreign policy, especially transatlantic. Um, so there is this old concept of the United States works with 20% of presidential instinct, especially the stronger presidents, and 80% of entrenched bureaucracy who are hard hitters, who have been around for a very long time. And you know Halperin's book about foreign policy and how the bureaucracy works in and through that entire framework. Do you think there's going to be a pushback?
Obviously, there's going to be a pushback, right? There are entrenched interests. There are people who understand Washington, D.C. They've spent their life in D.C. Of course, it is not true that bureaucrats don't know what they're doing and they must be, cut to size. So there is going to be pushback. But understand that there's been a major shift in US politics. If you miss that, you'll miss the bureaucratic conversation. The entire politics of the United States has moved to the right. So old Republicans can now contest as Democrats, but can't win as Republicans because the Republican Party is now Trump's party. This is not the old Republican Party. The left of the Democratic Party has kind of disappeared, right? Except in pockets. So what you are seeing now is a major shift in how Capitol Hill, the Congress and Senate, will operate. For the next 2 years, he has both under his control, and he is going to be dictating how things move. There's also a very interesting Pakistani parallel to politics in the United States, which is that if you don't obey the top, you lose your job. This wasn't Washington usually. Right now, if you see all key positions, even the political positions on Capitol Hill, you are seeing people either fall in line or disappear, right? So with that in mind, I think this is not going to be 20%. This is going to be 60%, and the pushback is going to be squeezed in some ways. The other thing to keep in mind is that there is a inherent contradiction in the electorate of the United States. It's a polarized country now. It's 50-50 basically. But Trump's electorate has said what? They've basically said that the United States for too long has sacrificed for the nation for the empire meaning the world. And now it's time that the empire pays back the nation, okay? Which essentially means I'm going to be inward looking. I will try and find ways to bring back production into the United States because, very simply put, what is Trump saying? He's saying that the entire liberal order was built on one premise, which is that the West, but really the American consumer, will spend and the world will produce at a cheaper cost. And now he's saying this has gone too far. The entire benefit is going to the Chinas of the world, and here is my consumer and my electorate struggling because I don't produce anything. So now I will produce, I will consume, and the rest of the world can go to hell. That's essentially in a nutshell what this.
Okay. I'll circle back to this and ask you and also Hina about this whole tariff thing because this is something which the economists are not particularly keen on for various reasons. But let me just move to the Middle East, Leila. One of the unfortunate things that we witnessed in the last more than a year was that the entire idea of human rights and the rest, which the Democrats propound, was upended when it came to Gaza and also Lebanon. and to the point where a Democrat president is, widely now referred to as genocidal Joe. So in that sense, and we have also seen what the GOP, the Grand Old Party, has been saying, and its various legislators. So I'm not particularly sure whether Trump's coming in would, in any case, change that. Although, if we go by what happened previously, when he allowed the US Embassy to move to Jerusalem, when he shut down the PLO office, when he legitimized Israeli occupation of the Golan, when he allowed settlements, the US ambassador, himself a Jewish person, his daughter made Aliyah while he was there, and he was constantly being seen with settlers like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and others. Do you fear that he will try to do more of the same? He will again try to present the Palestinians, allow the Israelis to exterminate them and to expel them. What is your, thought about how this is going to play out?
First of all, thank you for having me again over here. And I'm sitting next to like the brightest minds in Pakistan, so I have to say that I'm honored. No, both of you actually, but she has been my idol for a long time. I have to say that I was really happy to see my name next to hers on the panel. When it comes to the United States, it's not about Trump or genocidal Joe or anybody else. The foreign policy for the United States doesn't change with the president. The execution changes. You either speed it up or you play the back door. With the Democrats, they played the back door by having uprisings inside certain areas they wanted to basically insert change. When it comes to Trump, he goes with a direct effect. And he's not stupid, by the way. Yes, we call him the Cheetos, the lazy man, the verbal diarrhea, convivi, that's the word that stuck to him. But when it comes to Donald Trump, he's very smart. He's a businessman, as Dr. Moeed said, and at the same time, he's a show businessman. He sells you the words that you want to hear, and he knows his constituency very well. In the United States, you speak to the general audience as if you're speaking to a 5-year-old. You give them the glamorous fights, and at the same time, you keep the foreign policy as is. The US foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East has never changed. One, securing resources, keeping the markets for themselves, and supporting their only ally over there, and that's the Israeli entity. Their allies are not the Saudi Arabia, not basically the Arabs over there, or anybody else. In fact, these are the golden egg-laying geese for him. Israel is the only ally, and that's how you see it. He takes money from the GCC and elsewhere, and he pours that money into the Israeli entity to keep it happening. The way I see Trump acting going forward, he told you. He said a few years back, and he repeated it earlier this year, last year. Now it's 2025. I'm still stuck in 2024. He said, I look at the map, and I find Israel as a tiny dot on the map, and I'm thinking of how we can make it larger. The only way you can make an entity larger is by giving it more land. Where do you create land? From Mars? Do you bring it from Mars? No. He will be cutting land from neighboring countries. And Israel is already occupying Lebanese territories. It has recently occupied Syrian territories, that's south of Syria. And it already occupies Palestine and is taking over Gaza. And if the Jordanians and the Egyptians think that their relationship with the Americans is going to safeguard them from having parts of their land taken by the Israelis, then they're dreaming. I'm telling you one thing that when I say it, when I actually said it a few months back, actually last month, not a few months back, in one of my spaces on Twitter, I said the Israelis are moving southeast of Syria now. And what's there? You have Jordan, then you have Iraq. And their plan is already exposed. When we said that, our space directly got cut off. It dropped. So the algorithm actually works against you telling the world what the Israelis are doing on the ground. So the way I see it, Trump is going to secure more land for the Israelis. He's going to completely disregard any infringements to human rights or whatever it is. They don't care about human rights unless it touches their own interests. This is what the West is. They talk about humanity, They talk about, oh, poor people are being oppressed, let's say, in Pakistan, in Lebanon, in Syria. That's only when the leadership is not listening to what the Americans have to say. If the leadership is complying with the US, they will overlook these infringements. They don't care about your human rights, they care about their rights over here.
I'll come to Al-Shara. I'll come to Al-Shara and what happened in Syria and how things have started, turning around for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But let's come to our neighborhood. And last time, Trump had a funny kind of relationship with Pakistan. He started by condemning Pakistan and by sanctioning Pakistan. And then, of course, when he met with the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, he was full of praise for him. What a great sportsman, and the rest of it. So, how do you suppose he is going to deal with West and South Asia? And when I say South Asia, I'm clearly geographically lumping together Pakistan and India. We know, with the Indians, they have a strategic partnership. But do you think it's going to be more of the same? Do you think he's going to Grenell Pakistan, if you will? Or shall I say Richard Grenell Pakistan? How is he going to behave?
Okay, so Ejaz has done to me what everybody internationally typically does to someone who's representing Pakistan and South Asia. Can you tell us what is Pakistan's view? I shall not tell you what is only Pakistan's view, but what is generally. So I will not, I will start by just generally reflecting on some of the discussion over here, because I think it's really profound and it's very interesting, and it's a matter of perspective, because I have a very, very different perspective than perhaps Moeed from it, right? Because Moeed's vantage point is coming from having lived in Washington, worked within the think tanks. For him, the Babus are good people who want good for the world, who want to fight for human rights, who want to defend human rights, who will go to war for human rights, who will invade Iraq and Afghanistan and leave a lot of chaos and then go on to the next project, and it'll all be good. And this is not to you, Moeed, personally. I'm just trying to make a point. And to me, as someone who first started looking into this world from a foreign policy lens back in 2010, and was absolutely convinced that the West is far more civilized in their thinking and far more earnest in their protection of human rights. And they were absolutely, without any question, wanting to have the same platform and give the same opportunities to everyone, the same trade rights, etc., etc., etc. And then I grow up. 20 years happen. And you realize that the rules of the game are great, and we all have to play fairly as far as the rules of the game are working in our favor. And the moment the rules of the game start appearing, that some other leadership or leaders may appear, and some entities or countries or group of countries may appear who may start challenging our place, then we all start wanting to be disruptive. So I question when we think that Trump is either anarchist or disruptive or anything like that, because I think in some ways, Trump probably would at least say what he's doing, right? And not even do that, perhaps, sometimes, right? And much of what has enabled, because you see, the first time Trump came, I think all of us, the intelligentsia and not, were convinced that this was an aberration. That was not the United States of America. This was just an aberration. This was just something going wrong, and people explained, oh, people did not have economic rights anymore, and people were losing out since the 80s, etc., etc., etc. But now we know it is not an aberration. And I think the reality is that people are reacting like this because what we like to lovingly call order ceased to exist many, many, perhaps, years or decades back. There was this, this time of what Fukuyama called the end of history, peaceful coexistence, because we were no more fighting about which way to rule, etc. That all was, in some ways, a fallacy of our imagination. And right now what is happening in the world is hegemonic powers and centers of power, what have been the preservers and protectors of liberal world order, reacting and breaking that order. Because, Ejaz, I think we cannot sit here and not see with our own eyes what is happening. Today, the people and the countries which are questioning and breaking the order are not the anarchists or the oligarchic countries. They are the democratic holders of that order, okay, because it doesn't suit them anymore. So with that, I'm just going to, now answer your question.
Okay.
To Pakistan, look, a lot of people have asked me what will happen wherever I go. Even Pakistanis, the first Pakistani, even at airports, Madam, Imran Khan reha ho jayega, Trump aa gaya. Okay, so the answer is Pakistan is really, there was this famous call thing in the previous administration that luckily I was not part of. Call me, call me, call me. Okay, there's no call coming. We should stop expecting a call, and we should celebrate the fact that we are not a relevant country, because we've only been relevant in the most irrelevant and, and in ways which has only damaged us. So we should celebrate the fact that Pakistan is not relevant, that way. But let's also admit the fact that in US, lobbying is legal. There are very, very important people who might have paid large amounts of money to the Trump campaign, and now he might owe it to them. Okay, so that is another thing that may, have its own circles. But as far as the interest level in Pakistan and who is ruling Pakistan, etc., and who's not, they might do with whatever is there. But if there's strong lobbyists, you might see another story.
Okay, so a quick follow-up on this, and this is something that I'm going to take to Moeed also. It's one thing to say that Pakistan is irrelevant, and quite another thing to say that it does not worry the United States. I mean, let me give you an example. And this is obviously the current administration. We had the Deputy National Security Advisor, Jonathan Finer, speak at the Carnegie Endowment and talk about a certain kind of rocket motors that we are testing. Okay? Unfortunately, the entire statement was wrongly picked up here, even at the highest echelons of the government, including the current Prime Minister. And everyone here started talking about, oh, the Americans have said something about the nuclear program. They have not said anything about the nuclear program. They have also not said anything about the missile program per se, but specifically about a certain category of rocket motors which can be used both in the ICBMs as well as the SLVs, the space launch vehicles. So my point is that we are not relevant in the sense of being strategic partners, a la, for instance, India, but we're definitely a country that and not for reasons of our own, but for their reasons, for their interests or concerns, worry them.
So I think because English is not my first language, relevance for me, I say it positively. And people really start reacting when you say, oh, Pakistan is irrelevant. No, of course not. I do not mean at all that Pakistan is not a country which has immense potential, which has immense relevance within the region in the positive way. What I'm saying is that currently where the United States of America is, where there's China containment policy being the heart, center, core of their existence and their foreign policy, the lens through which they view the world is China containment. The bonhomie that they're having with India and have been having in the last decade plus is the result of that much more than, as we told in the 58 points, Biden, Modi statement. Anyone who reads that statement, okay, maybe 20 pages for 58 points, there is nothing, whether it's space, technology, chip manufacturing, the length, breadth, depth, and variety in that statement does not match a NATO ally and US's statement. Okay? And they talk about our two democracies and our great, values together. But the truth is that India is seen to be the net security provider and perhaps the only important and, large enough state which has the potential to militarily. They also now have naval, not a naval base, but repair. You know these things better than I do with the Indians. So in this scenario, the US's interest to impress Pakistan or keep Pakistan, and I think they're making a big mistake. Why are they making a big mistake when it came to India? India did not feel the need to choose US over Russia. They continue to import oil, break all the sanctions, etc., right? However, the US feels obliged in order to impress and interest and and continue to engage with India in the depth that they want to do India's bidding. It's a bit like the Israel, Mershimer's famous book on US lobby.
Yeah,
No,
Meshaimer
Israel lobby, Mershimer's
Meshaimer and Walt.
and exactly Stephen Bolton. And so pretty much like the Indians are so keen on ensuring that Pakistan, in some ways, as they say, can be isolated. I mean, we just won a Security Council seat with almost like an absolute majority, right? So clearly, I'm not saying irrelevant, unimportant. I'm saying irrelevant in a good way.
Right. Moeed, I want you to quickly address this issue of Pakistan's relevance or otherwise. But then I want you to just sort of fly over to the other side of the Atlantic and address two things with reference to Trump. One is, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war. The other is what Trump has said. Kellogg was actually supposed to go to Kyiv, but he postponed that until after the inauguration. He has already put out a roadmap for peace. And allied with that, of course, you have the situation in Germany, which is being variously called the sick man of Europe. They've had snap polls. We are SPD is unlikely to be a major coalition partner, according to various analyses. Zeiten Wende hasn't really worked out. So will the Europeans step up to the plate? How would the Russo-Ukraine war pan out? How do you think Trump is going to pressure the Europeans into doing his bidding? And finally, and somewhat mischievously, I want to ask you whether when we talk about Europe, should we use it as a collective noun to begin with?
Thank you, Ejaz. Sorry, I'm going to be a bad guest because I'm far more interested in Pakistan than what you asked me. So I'll come to that. But let me, if you allow me, pick up from where Hina left. Okay, one thing, this keeps coming back, and I actually don't know of any other country that does this so regularly as we do, which is this culturally derived view of foreign policy and international relations. Um, so the US project of going to Afghanistan, then Iraq, moving on, which is absolutely true. That is what international relations is. So this idea that the West has a hypocritical foreign policy stance is exactly right, and that's exactly what they've always said. All these frameworks of human rights, free trade, all of this came about when it suited the status quo power, which was the Western world. And I don't think we should be sitting here, talking as we do always. Bad partner, was with us, left us. This wasn't a marriage where we had a divorce or something. These are two countries who were looking after their own interests. Enlarging Israel's space is seen as their interest at this point. It's a realist world, right? I mean, I'm not being callous, but this is just the reality of it. We do the same. Look at our policy in Afghanistan. How do we sort of talk about that? That's exactly the point. I think we will be much better off as a country looking at the world if we simply accept that only interests of countries matter. And in that battle of supreme interests, we have consistently been losing to India for the past 2 to 3 decades. And because India's got the upper hand, it actually has managed to squeeze our space to a large extent. I think that's fundamentally what matters to us at the end of the day, whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever it is. That's one. The second part of this is, I think relevance or irrelevance, if I may just say, that question is irrelevant till we can figure out where we want to go as a country. Right? We get caught up in these totally useless things, and I agree with Hina there, call aayi ke nahi aayi. Trump अच्छा है कि बुरा है? The issue is, if you are sitting in any country in the world right now, or for the past 10, 20 years, and looking down on Pakistan, what's the conversation? A country that can't get its own act together wants to continue punching above its weight. I'm sorry, this comes, I feel really terrible saying this. But we are a country which has a potential to do anything and everything we want. And simply because of petty governance, I don't even call it bad governance, petty minds doing petty governance for years, this government, that government, doesn't matter, we've become a laughingstock. And every time I talk to anybody, my former counterparts, let's say, I'm sure Hina does the same, we are irrelevant only in one way. They don't have time for us. And that's what we should be thinking sitting in this hall, frankly. Because till we can do that, we are even losing the space that we used to have. I mean, just one more sentence on this, then I'll give you a one-line answer on your real question. India was actually friendless in 1991. It did not have a single friend. Whatever it did, which I hate sitting here as a Pakistani, but whatever it did, it's found space to checkmate Pakistan unreasonably, illogically, but the world listens to it. And rather than saying that the world is bad, we need to figure out what that game is on the chessboard that gets us back to where we used to be. On Europe, very simply, just look, as I said, Trump's starting and ending point is, I'm a businessman, I look at my balance sheet. I am not going to pay these rich countries whether to fight wars or to end wars. I may do that if I'm talking about the Middle East, if my real goal is, perhaps Greater Israel or whatever it may be. But in Europe, he's going to basically tell them, keep fighting the war if you want, keep buying from me if you want, arms, energy, whatever, but I am not going to put my money to this. And if you are unwilling to put your money, then let's sit down and ask Russia what's the minimum acceptable, live with that as long as we don't have another war on our border. I think that's basically where he'll end up.
You should have told me when I sent the email that you only want to talk about US-Pakistan.
No, the former foreign minister provoked me.
Okay. Okay. So, Leila, given what you think Trump is likely to do, for which we have a lot of evidence going by, as discussed in his previous tenure, how do you think the current Arab rulers, how would Egypt under LCC, or Jordan, or Saudi Arabia, or the UAE, react to a project that actually goes underway and can be clearly seen with reference to, of course, it's an ongoing Nakba, we know that. But for instance, Jordan and Egypt created a red line. And the thing about red lines is that if the other person crosses it, then you have to enforce that red line. So my question is two parts. One is, would this kind of thing, very overt, brazen kind of thing, actually push these rulers into reacting? And if, and that's the second question, in the event that they still do not react, do you think the street is simmering enough in these countries to actually, for us to see some kind of upheaval, internal upheaval?
Well, we've been 15 months into this ongoing genocide and the onslaught against my people and the Palestinians as well, and the Syrians, because everybody keeps forgetting that the Syrians were being bombarded from day one by the Israelis. And there's also the Yemenis that are being beaten by the Israelis and the Americans, and they're basically holding their ground. If the Arab world, be it rulers or population, wanted to act, they would have acted long time ago, or at least when Hind Rajub, the little girl who was shot hundreds of times by an Israeli tank, While she was in her relative's car, everybody around her were dead. She did a phone call to 911 in her own Gaza Strip to send an ambulance to help her out. And if any of those Arab leaders or the population had any compassion in them, or they were brave enough, I'm not going to use the brass balls thing because I'm going to keep it clean. But if they had any courage or any empathy in them, they would have acted long time ago or back then. I want to divide the leaders of the Arab world into three categories. And they all act, as Dr. Moeed said, when it came to Pakistan. They look at petty grievances and they forget the larger picture that they are all at threat by the Israelis. You have the cowards among the leadership. And when I talk about Arab leaders, I'm not only talking about GCC, you have to understand. We have 22 Arab countries, and we have 57 Islamic countries in this world. Not a single country acted. You had entities within certain countries acting, be it in Lebanon or Yemen, basically, or Palestine. Elsewhere, it was silence. So you have the cowards who don't dare do anything because the Americans will get back at them and they're afraid of America. And then you have the collaborators and enablers, those who actually, because of petty grievances, and they think that they can be players in the Middle East, they act with the one who's strong because they believe in the line that says, governments act based on their own interests. It doesn't matter if anybody else is dying or they're facing a problem. But they forget that when you have a bunch of sticks next to each other, it's hard to break. If you take each stick and break it alone, it will break. And eventually, the Israelis and the Americans are breaking each stick, and their turn will come. Those Arab countries that they think that they are going to be untouchable, they will be touched, because the Americans and the Israelis don't look at any allies in the Middle East, they look at cattle. And the third type are the ones who want to do something, but they cannot because of their surrounding and because of their internal policies that have been divided for the longest time. Unfortunately for us, this is enabling the Israelis to do whatever they want and nobody's doing anything. And when somebody raises their head to say no, enough is enough, they are labeled a terrorist. And basically that only applies to you if you're a Muslim. That's the sad part. And the international media machine is ready to actually paint that picture anytime the West or the Israelis need them to paint that picture. So they will create a villain out of a victim, and they will create a victim out of a villain. So when it comes to Trump, going forward, the Palestinians, the Syrians, and the Lebanese are terrorists because they're fighting the Israelis. Poor Israelis, look at them. They're terrified in their shelters. They disregard that you have nearly 55,000 Palestinians have been killed, over 100,000 have been injured and maimed. Most of them are decapitated for life. Both legs, one leg, no eyes. You have families that have been eradicated from the registrar forever. They have no trace at all anymore. In South Lebanon, the Israelis continue until today, despite the fact that they had agreed to an understanding of a ceasefire towards the cessation of hostilities. Since day one, November 27th, 4 a.m. in the morning, the Israelis went in to the towns and villages in South Lebanon that they couldn't take over when the resistance was fighting them. The resistance had stuck to the ceasefire agreement, but the Israelis haven't. They never stick to any agreement, if you look at their history. You have over 80 years of them disregarding all international resolutions, and this is not going to be different. So the Israelis will continue to do mass human rights infringement, destruction, etc., protected by Trump. And if it's not Trump, it's somebody else. No matter what, as I said, the foreign policy will be the same.
But I want to also quickly ask you something that I'm sure the audience will be deeply interested in. The future of Hezbollah, now that the land bridge given Syria has broken between Iran and Hezbollah, how do you think Hezbollah is going to replenish and sustain itself? I also understand that this whole talk about clearing South Lebanon of Hezbollah or pushing Hezbollah north of the Litani River is a non-starter in the sense that most of the Hezbollah cadres belong to South Lebanon, so they're not going to move away from there. That's their area. So how is Hezbollah going to fare now?
All right, it's very important to clarify what Hezbollah is, because the international media has been using the word as if they have come from Mars to occupy Lebanon on behalf of the Iranians, and they don't belong to the land. So I'm looking at this beautiful congregation of people over here from various areas in Pakistan, from Lahore and elsewhere, I'm sure. All of you belong to Pakistan. And at any point you have an outside enemy coming over to take your land, any of you under international law have the right to hold arms and fight that occupation until it's over. This is international law. In South Lebanon, the Israelis had occupied South Lebanon for a really long time. The successive governments had forgotten about South Lebanon for the longest time, so people had to hold arms and fight for their land. And bit by bit, they started looking for allies. One of those allies was Iran, that was supporting them with weapons, because the Iranians also act based on their own interest. They like to find where there are gap holes, and they go and fill them. Oh, you have nobody to help you out? We will come and help you. That's for their own interest. That's something else. But the people on the ground, they're fighting not on behalf of the Iranians. They're fighting for their land, and they're using the training that the Iranians give them. I'm not saying the Iranians are good or bad. This is up to them, okay? Hezbollah are the farmers, butchers, lawyers, doctors, who hail not only from South Lebanon, but also from the Bekaa area. You have people from Beirut and elsewhere. The media also wants you to think that Hezbollah is only Shia. There are dozens of South Lebanese villages that are Christian, Druze, and basically other minorities, and Sunnis. So it's not only Shia. And Hezbollah has a division that's actually comprised of those faiths and religions fighting against the Israeli occupation of their own land in South Lebanon. You have people from across Lebanon coming over to help Hezbollah as well. So when you think that the Israelis at any point, or the Americans say, oh, we want to get rid of Hezbollah south of the Litani River. South of the Litani River, we have a river in south that goes from Bekaa all the way down to South Lebanon, and it divides South Lebanon into 2 points, north and south. The southern part is few thousand kilometers squared. That's filled with hundreds of thousands of people. Most of those people, if they are not an active member of Hezbollah, they support Hezbollah because they've seen what the Israelis have done to them. Do you think if you eliminate the armed presence of Hezbollah over there, it will deter the farmers from holding a pitchfork and attacking the Israelis if the Israelis attack them? At the moment, we are sticking to a ceasefire, and it's very fragile. It is very fragile. 3 weeks ago, Hezbollah retaliated to the 80th Israeli infringement by throwing 2 rockets into one of our contested lands, the Khar Hills in Ruwaysat al-Alam. And Israelis directly cried wolf in front of all the international media that the Lebanese side infringed the ceasefire. But the international media didn't look at the 80 Israeli infringements. Today, as of today, we have over 1,000 Israeli infringements to the ceasefire, including yesterday morning when you had the Israeli drones attacking and blasting one of our civilian minivans, and lots of people were injured in that attack. The international media doesn't cover it. You don't get it because of media blackout and censorship in this part of the world. And the world will only think that the Israelis are being attacked by the resistance. There's always an action from our side. It's not a reaction, because they don't show you the original action by the Israelis. So Hezbollah will not be cleared out of South Lebanon. This is very important for you to understand, because it's the people on the ground. And so long that there's an occupation, under international law, we have the right to hold arms. And by the way, I'm not pro-Hezbollah. I'm not pro-political parties because they divide the country, but I have to say things as they are.
Okay, so we've almost run out of time, but very quickly, no, that wasn't because of you. That was my mismanagement, because I don't have a watch. But, Hina, you and Moeed also talked about governance in terms of how we interest or worry the world. But frankly, we really don't have that much time first to set governance right before we can do certain other things. Now, obviously, that is something that needs to be set right, but there are structural problems towards that also. And there are structural problems and external compulsions also that force us or our hand into doing certain things, acting or reacting, because we are not just operating in a vacuum. So, having been a foreign minister, what do you think, like one, two, three, that we need to do with reference to Trump to try and sort of sail through these rocky waters? A difficult one?
You'd hate me for saying this. It's a flawed question.
Really?
Absolutely. You're talking about internal Pakistan governance problems.
No, no, I am
Which are
saying that
many.
we don't have enough time to set that
Okay,
right,
sure,
because
sure, sure. What
there
can
are
Pakistan do?
there are things
Okay.
happening
Yeah,
outside.
okay,
Trump is not going to wait for us to
Sure.
improve our governance.
of
So
course.
he is going to do certain things with reference to India,
Got
with
it.
reference to this region.
Yeah.
So what are we supposed to do
Look,
in terms of one, two, three to address that?
I think first of all, we have to be realistic and we have to stop playing this big man's game with a small, kitty and very little else to offer in terms of what do you look. We all keep on talking about our problem is this. We all want to improve exports and we say investment law and exports badhao. These two things require for you to have some core expertise, from core competence, for you to have some things which you make better than everybody else at a better cost. You're more efficient, you are better at it than everyone else. And then you can export, right? But we never want to really spend the energy on the ecosystem. So with the US also, I think the problem is if we want to be in the big club without working our way up, you're not going to be there. Okay, so when we say, okay, India squeezed us, there's very good reason why India squeezed us. 1991, Manmohan Singh came, they set the economy right. Before that, they had they had a journey. We've had short, so we are like in sprints, no, long distance, and then we think that we'll be able to. If you want to look towards another country as to how to do it, I think China is a great example. But with the US, I think we first of all, most importantly, need to be realistic. We are 58th or somewhere in terms of their export destinations. They are second or first, right? So we just need to be realistic that yes, we are here and they are there. And how do you want to engage with them? We must stop believing also. I think this is also very important. For instance, we don't like the word Indo-Pacific.
I
So,
don't.
Up until recently, when we went to the Foreign Office and fixed it, of course.
Oh, it's
Up-
Asia
yeah.
Pacific and
No, no.
Yeah.
Up until recently, we said Indo-Pacific, Pakistan doesn't like the word. Okay, we don't like the word. Now the whole world has Indo-Pacific strategies. The whole world is having Indo-Pacific summits. The whole world is having Indo-Pacific meetings. And smart Pakistan is saying, I don't like the word. I'm going to sit it out. मेरी कुट्टी होगी सबसे मैं अलग बैठ जाऊंगा अपना नुकसान कर लूंगा लेकिन मेरा लफ्ज अगर तुम इस्तेमाल करोगे look I look at it, it's Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indo-Pacific, okay, it is what it is. Can you change the world? No, you can't change. So stop thinking you can change the world. You are what you are where you are, you're in this region, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. How will you play your strengths? What is your strength? Your population. Okay? What do you have to offer? So I think we just have to be realistic about, and call ka wait nahi karna. Jitni institutional, at some level we have some institutional, things happening with them. Go through that, try and build the base, try and build the trust, yes, based on absolute raw interest, but have we been able to preserve our interests vis-a-vis? Why are we? Sometimes one asks the question, in what do we owe anyone's asks at the moment, after whatever else has happened, right? And just be realistic about what to do and what you want to get out of it.
Quickly, Moeed, same question to you. One, two, three. What should we do? I mean, Trump is obviously going to do things. He's not going to wait for us to clean up our act.
Number one, as the state, stop lying about where we are and what our potential is. I think it's pretty much what Hina is saying. Just figure out what is possible and work towards that. We spend way too much time convincing ourselves and pretending to our 250 million people that we belong to, the galaxies, and we're just not being allowed to get there. Number two, very frankly, just make up our minds. What do we want this country to be? And once you figure that out, there may be other paths. But on a policy level, whatever policies we want to come up with consensually, let them work. Right? So when I was sitting in a chair of responsibility, we came up with something called the National Security Policy. Right? It actually gave a direction of where Pakistan could go given this US-China storm that's coming. It may be the wrong one. Let's sit down, redo it, figure out what that path is, agree, and move. But you can't have a country where every 3 years Plato will descend, create something, then anti-Plato will come, create something, and thesis, antithesis continues on, right? Today, I don't know, maybe Hina can speak to this, I don't know which of the various paths that were enunciated by various governments we are following. That's the problem. Just agree on what we can do. No one government is going to get everything right. And then tinker with it as things happen. If Trump comes tomorrow and messes India's access through visas, you have an opportunity. If he squeezes you more, you've got to recalibrate. The danger, Ejaz, I'll tell you is, I worry that if I speak to people in Washington and Beijing, when they say the exact same thing, which is we really don't know what you're up to, then we have a problem.
It's I never like predictive approaches, because you just cannot extrapolate into the future from present trend lines. But I have a sense, and I'm planning to write something about this, that the Indians who have been milking everyone are unlikely to continue to do that with Trump in the driver's seat. But before I close this session, I just want 3 questions, just 3 questions, quick questions to the 3 speakers, and then we'll close the session. Ji.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Madam Hina Rabbani, you said that don't wait for the call. Senator Moeed Hussain, judiciary, जो नवाज शरीफ वाली चल रही थी, he was on the TV channel. He said 001 से call आएगी, सब ठीक हो जाएगा. Sorry. Your ex-Prime Minister, Hakan Abbasi, made a statement that Pakistan government was run by a very low American employee for 3 years. So what are you, these are the things on publish and available on all the things that I'm saying. हमें तो report वहीं से आती है. My point is this, do you not think that you people are pushing us, जो call से फायदा हो सकता है वो भी छोड़ दें and become better slaves?
Got your question. One more, this side. Ji.
Well, I'm very sorry to say what I'm going to say that.
Then don't say it.
No, I would rather say it. I would rather say it because you said it, so I think I'm entitled to say it. Because you don't want to listen that. It is so pathetic and disturbing that the whole nation is listening to a couple of people. There is somebody coming in the White House. What will happen to us? Are we that God-forsaken people that we can't really take our decisions? वहाँ से phone आएगा तो ये हो जाएगा, वहाँ से phone आएगा. What kind of people we are? And I tell you what kind of people we are. There are hundreds of people sitting here since morning, and I've attended all the previous sessions.
You must be tired.
No, they're not tired. You are tired. They are not tired because they're not allowed to speak. Okay. They're not allowed to speak. No, please listen to me. No, I'm not finished. I have not finished. Please speak.
Hold on. I'd asked for a question, not a comment.
No, it's not a question. It's a question of our survival.
For a comment, you can.
It's a question of our survival.
Sir, you are, I had asked for a question.
No, I live in this country.
Given,
I have seen 75 years.
You raise your hand, I gave you the mic.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to keep quiet. I am not going to keep quiet because I'm going to speak the truth.
Why don't you come here?
Wait a minute. Just don't get angry. Don't get angry.
No, I'm not getting angry because you're stepping your bounds.
No, I am not. I'm a public.
Yes, you are. I had asked for a question.
I am a public. I'm not going out of my bound.
Okay.
You are supposed to listen.
Go on.
All 70 years, we have seen as public, same faces in the parliament, in the policy making, in the governance. What is this? Are we these hundreds of thousands of people stupid, not capable of doing? We are not allowed to speak. And I think that is the message that we must be talking about. because this is what we are made into. Just 4 or 5 people, maybe a few hundred people in the parliament taking decisions without even consulting us, without even listening to us. That is the dilemma of this nation, not this what
Are
you
you,
have just
are you done?
discussed.
Okay. Is there a question now? Ji, ji. Ji.
So my question is for Leila. You talked about the right for any country to take up arms and a group of people who are being targeted to take up arms to defend themselves. Hezbollah is a group which has been classified as a terrorist organization by many democracies around the world. My question is about how Muslim nations can effectively call out Israel's actions without being cancelled for supporting an organization which has been classified as terrorist.
One more question. One more question. Anji.
Miss Leila, you have labeled proxy war between Iran and Israel as a crusade. Please, this is not a religious war between Muslim state and non-Muslim state. Please explain your stance.
What? What? उनको दे दें उनको दे दें
Hi. I just wanted to ask a question about Trump's foreign policy, specifically his remarks in terms of calling Trudeau a governor, calling Canada the 51st state, specifically speaking about Greenland and wanting Greenland, recently talking about the Panama Canal. My only question here is, what is Trump's bet now? What's his best alternative negotiated agreement here in terms of his wider geopolitical goal?
Okay, I'll take the presumption of answering your question myself. I gave my, in my introduction, I told you that he uses the bully pulpit. Pushes, goes into, sometimes it works. He tried to do it with North Korea also, it didn't work. It worked with South Korea. He renegotiated Chorus. He renegotiated NAFTA, which was renamed as the US-Mexico-Canada. The question with reference to Trudeau was a couple of days ago, he was on CNN. He was in DC to attend President Carter's funeral. And he was asked specifically these questions. And one of the things that he said is that we in Canada differentiate from the Americans by saying that we are not Americans and we are Canadians. So he's basically using this. Greenland, by the way, is a different issue altogether. It's a strategic issue. We didn't have time to get into that, but it's a completely different issue. With Canada, he's trying to push the Canadians further and the tariffs and the rest of it. Leila?
I'll start from the last question and I'll end up with Mr. Mushtaq, right? What's your name? Mushtaq. Haris, okay. Anis, okay. When it comes to Canada, when Trump wants to force something, he will directly attack. Attack is the best policy for him to actually initiate a reaction, for him to discuss business, politics, and other things. The Canadians directly retaliated by saying, well, how about we give 3 of your states Canadian citizenship and they become part of our land and we'll give them free healthcare. It's a joke between both of them, but the reality is they're trying to negotiate new trade agreements, among other things. That's for their own problem. This is not our problem when it comes to our region, but we can cap on it by playing both sides against each other if we have policy strategists over here that can actually play on that. And this is what Dr. Moeed had said, like we need to think of, like you and us and everybody else had to think of their policies and how they can cap on others' differences so they can actually enhance their government's position across the world. When it comes to the Organization of Islamic Countries and Hezbollah being labeled as a terrorist, who labels Hezbollah as a terrorist? Few democracies, as you call them. You know that the United States also jails reporters if they don't give out their contacts. That's basically what you call lack of freedom of speech. This is not a democracy. When you have two parties controlling 300 and 350 million people, that's not a democracy. When you look at Europe, where you cannot even voice your own opinion when it comes to supporting Palestine, that's not a democracy. It's only democracy when they want to be. Hezbollah, under international law, has not been labeled a terrorist organization by the United Nations. Why? Because so long that you call Israel an occupation under international law, occupied Palestinian territories, occupied Shibah farms, for example, okay, let's say it's contested land, the northern part of the town of Ghajar in Lebanon under United Nations is a Lebanese territory that's occupied by the Israelis. So the United Nations never labeled Hezbollah as a terrorist, never labeled Hamas as a terrorist because the Israelis occupied their land. The US labeling somebody a terrorist is something that's private for the US and its own club of privileged countries. Tomorrow it might announce Pakistan as a terrorist state. What are you going to say? Are you going to say Pakistan is a terrorist state? It's much as labeling Muslims as terrorists because one person committed a heinous crime. And we're seeing it recently with Elon Musk, who's going to be part of the administration, trying to label 3.8 million Muslims in London, in the UK, as terrorists who support rape and are rape apologists, which is not true. If you look at the rape crimes in the UK, most of them are being committed by non-Muslims. So the whole idea is that it's a perspective of how the media shows you. Again, under international law, because I'm a law graduate, I have a master's degree in international law, I can tell you that under international law, Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. You might like it, you might not like it, but this is the law. If the Americans label them as such, that's a US issue, not ours. How do we change that from an Islamic perspective? We need unity among the Islamic states to actually support our stand in the eyes of the world. We are strong, we have resources, we have the number of human capital. We're nearly 2 billion Muslims across the world, but because we are divided over petty grievances and because each one is afraid alone, we cannot do anything. When it comes to this whole issue, yes, it's not only a Muslim problem, it's a humanity issue. You don't have to be a Muslim to sympathize with people being killed by an occupation. And the world lacks this humanity and it's being hypocrite on the international level. The UN has no power, it's a toothless tiger because its political arm is being shackled by the veto power. When it comes to what you said, because I covered governments for a long time as a reporter, I can tell you one thing, yes, everybody is thinking the same. The problem with our governments are corrupt, everybody is looking for their own pockets. You have some few honest ones who are trying to help out. And I've interviewed some of those few honest ones across not only my country, but across all of the MENA region, because I lived and traveled throughout the MENA region. Minasa actually, and I have met also with Pakistani and also Indian, among others. The problem is that it's not like because we lack, or the governments lack hearing from the people, they know what the people think. But they also care about their pockets more, or they don't want somebody to outshine them in power, so they don't hire the right people in the right places. The moment we start thinking about the collective country, how we can enhance it, that's when we start basically acting properly as governments.
With that, the session is closed. Please give a big hand to the panelists.